Okay, just imagine this for a second. It's Christmas Eve. Your house is full of life, the kids are all excited about their new toys, and then by morning, your home is just a pile of smoldering ash, and 5 of your children are gone. Not just gone, but completely vanished, without a single trace. So let's dive right into one of America's most chilling and heartbreaking unsolved mysteries, the disappearance of the Sodder children. For decades, if you were driving along a highway in West Virginia, you would have seen this billboard. It was this constant, haunting reminder of a family's private tragedy, put up by George and Jenny Sodder. See, they flat out refused to believe their children died in that fire, and their search for answers would turn this awful mystery into a story that has captivated people for generations. So our story starts right here, in Fayetteville, on a Christmas Eve that was supposed to be joyful, but instead, it became the first day of a lifelong nightmare for the Sodder family. Now, the official story said it was just a terrible accident, but the Sodders were absolutely convinced that the real answers were hidden somewhere in those ashes, clues to something much, much darker. To really understand why this family was so suspicious, you have to go back to that night. Because it wasn't just a fire. It was a series of really bizarre events, one right after the other, that started to paint a picture. A picture that looks less like a random accident and a whole lot more like a very carefully laid out plan. Let's walk through the timeline. Okay, so it starts out totally normal, The kids are just too excited to sleep. But then things start to get weird. At 12:30 in the morning, a phone call. A woman Jenny didn't know asked for a name she didn't recognize, and in the background, she could hear laughter and glasses clinking. Strange, right? Then, just half an hour later, a loud bang on the roof. Jenny kind of brushed these things off and went back to sleep. But at 1:30 a.m., she woke up again, and this time, the house was on fire.
So panic sets in, and every single thing they try to do to save the kids fails. The staircase to the children's attic bedroom, it's a wall of fire. The phone, to call for help, dead. The ladder that George always kept leaning against the side of the house, it's just gone. And then, get this, both of his big work trucks, which had been working perfectly fine just a few hours before, wouldn't start. It's like every possible way to rescue the kids or even call for help was blocked, one after another.
So in the days right after the fire, the official story just didn't add up. It didn't line up with what the Sodders knew, what they had experienced, and what they started to uncover for themselves. Their grief started to mix with a deep, gnawing suspicion. The official cause of the fire came back really fast. An accident. Faulty wiring, they said. But to George Sodder, that made zero sense. He just had the whole house rewired and inspected. And he had one single devastating question. If the wiring was so bad, how were the Christmas tree lights still on while the fire was just getting started? So, what about the children? Maurice, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty. Well, no remains were ever found in the ashes. And this was the official explanation from Fire Chief F.J. Morris. He said the fire was so incredibly hot that it just completely cremated them, left nothing behind. But Jenny Sodder, their mother, she just could not and would not accept that. And Jenny's disbelief was based on plain and simple logic. I mean, if the fire was hot enough to literally vaporize 5 children, bones and all, how come they found household appliances in the rubble? How did pieces of the tin roof survive? She even did her own heartbreaking experiments, burning animal bones in the yard to see what happened. And a crematorium worker later told her she was right. Even at 2,000 degrees for hours, human bones don't just disappear. Yet in the Sodder home, there was nothing. And then you have the dead phone line. A repairman came out and confirmed what the Sodders suspected. The line hadn't burned through in the fire. No, it had been deliberately cut. Just think about that for a second. That means somebody had to physically climb 14 feet up a utility pole and cut that wire. I mean, that's not an accident. That is premeditation, plain and simple. And what about that ladder? The one thing that might have given them a fighting chance to get to the kids' window. Well, they eventually found it. It had been thrown down an embankment, 75 feet away from the house. So it wasn't just borrowed or misplaced. Someone took it and hid it. Someone made absolutely sure there would be no rescue from the outside. And the evidence for arson just kept piling up. A bus driver who was passing by reported seeing people throwing what he called balls of fire at the house. And later, one of the surviving Sodder children found this weird, hard rubber object in the yard. George Sodder was convinced it was part of some kind of incendiary device, maybe like a pineapple-style hand grenade. So, with the official investigation basically shut down, the case was considered hopeless by the state. The Sodders had to take matters into their own hands.
They would go on to spend the rest of their lives, and pretty much their entire life savings, searching for their children and for the truth.
In 1949, George hired a pathologist to excavate the site. They were desperate for any kind of answer, and they did find something, a few small pieces of bone. They sent them off to the Smithsonian for analysis, and the results, well, they were an absolute bombshell. The vertebrae belonged to someone between 16 and 22 years old, way too old to be any of the missing kids. And worse, the bones showed no signs of ever being in a fire. The report suggested they probably came from contaminated fill dirt, maybe from a nearby cemetery.
This next part is just stunning. Remember that insurance salesman, the one who got angry with George over his anti-Mussolini comments and threatened that his house would go up in smoke and his kids would be destroyed? A private investigator hired by the Sodders found out that that same man was on the coroner's jury that ruled the fire an accident. Then, more than 20 years after the fire, something incredible arrived in the mail. It was a photograph of a young man who looked so much like their son Louis, just older. And on the back was this really cryptic message. The family hired another PI to track down the lead, but he took their money and vanished. But still, for the rest of their lives, this photo was this powerful symbol of hope. So after all these decades of searching, where does all this leave us? Well, the case is still cold, and there are really two main theories that try to explain what happened that night. So on one side, you have the theory that it really was just a horrible string of coincidences. A faulty wire, frozen water, trucks that wouldn't start, a misplaced ladder, all made worse by a truly incompetent investigation. But then there's the other theory, that the fire was never the main event. It was a diversion for a kidnapping, maybe carried out by the Sicilian mafia as payback for George's very public and very strong political opinions. In the end, I think this quote from George Sodder himself really gets to the heart of this entire story. Their search, their life's mission, it wasn't about revenge. It was about getting the one thing they were never given, a real answer. They just wanted to know for sure what happened to their children. And so the question that was on that old billboard still hangs in the air today. With all the key people in this story now gone and so much evidence lost to time, you just have to wonder, is there a final clue out there waiting to be found? Or is this a family tragedy that's just destined to remain a mystery forever?